Welcome to Monterey County Pops Pros Teach. I'm Carl Christensen, the music director and conductor of Monterey County Pops. Our orchestra of fully professional musicians presents free concerts of pops and patriotic music throughout Monterey County. During the school year, we visit local schools and conduct clinics and workshops for student musicians in the afternoon. And in the evening, we perform together in a free concert for their community. We are committed to mentoring young musicians, and since we have not been able to visit schools since March, we have created this series of instrumental clinics. They will be broadcast once a week on Comcast Channel 24, and they will also be posted on our website, montereycountypops.org, along with downloadable exercises, tips, and other print material. Bienvenido a Monterey County Pops Pros Teach. Soy Carl Christensen, director musical de Monterey County Pops. Nuestra orquesta de músicos totalmente profesionales presenta conciertos gratuitos de música ligera y patriótica en todo el condado de Monterey. Durante el año escolar visitamos escuelas y realizamos clínicas y talleres para estudiantes músicos por la tarde, y por la noche presentamos un concierto conjunto para su comunidad. Para nosotros, la educación musical de jóvenes músicos es muy importante, y como no hemos podido visitar escuelas desde marzo, hemos creado esta serie de clínicas instrumentales. Se transmitirán una vez a la semana en el canal 24 de Comcast y también se publicarán en nuestro sitio web montereycountypops.org junto con ejercicios, consejos y otro material impreso descargable. And now please enjoy our Euphonium baritone episode presented by our principal euphonium, John Thomas. Ahora disfruten de nuestro episodio del barítono presentado por nuestro barítono principal, John Thomas.
Hello, my name's John Thomas, and I am the euphonium player for the Monterey County Pops Orchestra. I am a private teacher. I am a director of the Santa Cruz City Band, which is a community band, and we've traveled to Ukraine. I own Thomas Musical Instruments, and we specialize in the repair of band instruments. So this is what I've done with my life. And I play a lot of low brass instruments that's given me a lot of opportunities to play in jazz bands and early music groups, brass quintets, all sorts of things. So I really, music's a big part of my life. So, I want to encourage you to stick with it, because I've met the most important people in my life. I've met through music. The places I've traveled in the world have been because of music. So it's been opened up a lot of great opportunities for me. So I wanted to introduce the different types of baritones or euphoniums. There's kind of that big question, what's the difference? And that's a complicated question depending on what part of the world you're talking about. Typically, baritones are smaller and euphoniums are bigger, even though they play the same notes. And I'm going to start with showing you. This is a baritone, and you can see the tubing is smaller in diameter. The weight of the instrument, everything is a little bit smaller, even though it plays the same notes as the euphonium does. So it's got a beautiful sound, and this is what you'll see in a lot of schools. Another instrument that you'll see in a lot of schools is the American baritone, which is sort of halfway in between, and it's been around a long time. It often has a bell that points forward, projects the sound forward, was used in marching bands a lot, and it also has the valves out front rather than up top. So a very similar sound. They're almost identical. And then we get to the euphonium, which is what I play with the orchestra. And it's a little bit bigger. It has a fourth valve on it. and I'll talk about that in a moment. The tubing is larger, the bell's just a little bit bigger, all the same notes. So you can hear it's just a little richer, a little warmer sound, but whatever your school has is going to be fantastic for that part. Now, the euphonium or baritone can read two different clefs, meaning that some of you might be reading treble clef, some of you might be reading bass clef. And it's not important which one you're reading. Eventually, if you keep playing and playing and playing, you're going to know both clefs. But if you're a trumpet player and you want to change instruments, you want to get into something that has some really cool band parts, and you're not one of 15 other players, the baritone's a great instrument, and the fingerings stay the same. That's why the treble clef. You can pick up a baritone, get a baritone book, and the notes, all the fingerings are going to stay the same for you. If you're a trombone player or something like that, then you're already reading bass clef, and that's where the euphonium players would start out with bass clef. But either one is great. The euphonium sort of comes from the invention of the valves in the early 1800s. Before the early 1800s, you could only play like a bugle. You could only play the overtone series. Those were and you can keep going higher, but that was it. So with the invention of valves, what the valves do is they add a length of tubing to lower the instrument. The longer the instrument, the lower the instrument. So when I push down a valve, and so on and so on. You can keep adding more and more valves, and it lowers it down. And eventually it covers all the notes, so you can play a chromatic scale or all the notes that you need to play. So in the early 1800s, they started inventing different types of valves where you could add that tubing, and this was one of the instruments that came out of that. And there were lots of crazy configurations, and plumbing and bell, all that changed. So Adolph Sax, who invented the saxophone, he helped organize the family of instruments. And in France and Belgium, you'll hear them called sax horns. So that's how they got organized, all the way from flugelhorn, alto horn, euphonium, and into the tubas. They were all organized into E flat or B flat keys. So that's a little bit about the history. So the next thing I thought I would do is talk a little bit about maintenance. I think a lot of times we assume that if the valves move, we're good to go, but that's not necessarily true. So let me show you a couple things. We're going to talk about oiling the valves, and I'm going to demonstrate on a baritone because it's a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to change instruments. Okay, and now you may see some of your friends turn the instrument upside down and pour oil into the holes in the bottom of the valve caps here. The reason that doesn't work, I brought an old valve with me. In the bottom of the valve is a hole. In the top of the valve is a hole. If you just pour oil there, it's going to go right through the middle of the piston, and it's going to soak your felts and corks that are up there, and very little oil is going to get on the sides of the valve, which is where we need it. So even though it's a little extra time to do this, what we're going to do is unscrew the cap. We're going to do these one at a time. And I'll just demonstrate on one. But if you take all three out and you set them on the table, they can get mixed up, and then it's unless you get them sorted out and put in correctly, your horn's not going to play. So here, I'm going to unscrew that first. And so we can just lift up the piston and pull it out halfway like that and pour some oil on the sides. You can let it run around the sides of the valve. Now when you set it back down, there's a valve guide. There's a key that makes that valve stay in one place rotationally. So you're going to turn that gently. Oftentimes the guide is plastic, so you don't want to push on it really hard because you can break the plastic, but you'll find that keyway and then screw the cap down. Now, if you oil your valves and then you can't get air through the horn, one of your valves is turned the wrong way. But on baritones, usually there's only one way that the valve can go in. So you're going to do that for all three valves. And really, you should do that before you play each time, even if they're working fine, because what the oil does is it helps wash the dirt through and it prevents them from sticking. So just like your parents don't wait for the engine to seize up on your car until you add oil, you want to add oil before the valves start sticking. That way it's going to be problem-free all the time. So the other thing that a lot of people don't realize or understand is that the slides need grease. And if you wait, same thing, if you wait for the slides to stick, sometimes you're taking it to the repair shop to get them to remove it, or you end up breaking the instrument trying to get the slide out. So once a month is a good interval. Once a month you can pull the slides out, and I'm going to show you in just a minute. But there's a main tuning slide, and this is the slide here that affects the pitch for the whole horn. So when you're tuning up with your band director and you're looking at a tuner or you're listening to the concert B flat, this is the slide you move to get in tune here. These slides here tune each valve, and that's more detailed. Most horns you can just push those in all the way, and that's good for now. But it's important that they move, because one thing that happens is that you collect water in there. So if you hear that gurgling sound, you can pull the slide and dump the water. Well, if your slide is stuck, now you can't get the water out of the horn. So I'm going to pull a slide off here. The main tuning slide comes all the way out, and then you can take a napkin or a paper towel. Where'd my, uh-oh. There we go. Okay, so you can take your napkin and wipe the old grease and dirt off. Then you can take tuning slide grease. Don't use automotive products to do this. You want to go to the music store or go online and get actual tuning slide grease. Because there's a lot of products, you would think oil wouldn't cause corrosion. It can. And it can also gum up. The wrong kind of oil can gum up, or and also can be toxic if you're breathing air through the horn. So you want to, and just take your fingertip and smear fresh grease onto each tube. And then carefully, you don't want to get the slide in there crooked. You want to put it in as straight as you can, so it just goes straight in. Sometimes you have to wiggle it back and forth, and there you go. Sometimes there's a little bit extra that accumulates when you first push it in. You can just wipe that off and wipe it off on a paper towel. So that's how you grease the slides and oil the valves. Getting the water out of it when you're done playing is important, because if you leave the water in there, that promotes the corrosion. It promotes the sticky valves and the stuck slides. So that's some stuff on maintenance. If your mouthpiece gets stuck, find someone with a mouthpiece puller. Do not take a wrench to it or whatever. You can, believe me, if it gets stuck, it's stronger than the horn. You'll tear the horn apart. So, but things to avoid the mouthpiece getting stuck: don't leave it in there overnight. When you're done playing, take the mouthpiece out, because over time the water that's in there will create corrosion and it'll lock itself together. The other thing is, no cool popping sounds on the mouthpiece, because what you're doing is jamming that mouthpiece in there and making it really tight. So it makes a cool sound, but it's not, you're going to have a stuck mouthpiece. Okay, so let's start with, and again, I'm going to continue to use this horn because it's easy to see. Let's talk about hand position, because some horns, they don't have a thumb ring, or they've got a bar, but it's not in the right place. You know, not every horn is the same. Every configuration is a little different. So you don't want to hang your hand down like this. You want to have your hand up and a slight arch to the fingers. You don't need to have a curve or a claw, but if you do the flat finger thing, if you do this and try and play like that, it's just not, you have no dexterity and you have no strength. So a little bit of an arch to your fingers and having your thumb oppose your first finger like a pincher bug, so that you have strength to push the valves down quickly and positively. So this horn happens to have a thumb ring just in the right spot for me, so I have a locator and a little bit of leverage, but when I play, I've got an arch. Now, another thing about the valves is that it's just human nature. When we have fast notes, we move the valves quickly, and when we have slow notes, we move them slowly, but that doesn't work, because your transition between the notes has to be very quick. If you move the valve slowly, right, that spot in between up and down, there's nothing there. So you have to make sure that even though you're playing slowly, right? So my fingers move very quickly for each note change, even though I'm playing a slow passage. So that's kind of the valve information. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about fourth valve, and I'm going to pick up the euphonium to demonstrate this. Now, probably the instrument that your school has, that if you have a 4-valve euphonium at the school, is going to have 4 valves in a row. So you're going to end up using your right hand to operate all 4 of them, and that's very normal. Basically, what the 4th valve does is it's a substitute for the fingerings 1 and 3. And the reason we want to substitute is the 1 and 3 fingering is very sharp on all brass instruments. Any brass instrument, 1 and 3 is a very sharp note. And so if you have a 4th valve, you can play it, you can use that instead, and it will play it very closely to being in tune. And as well as 1, 2, and 3, instead you can play 2 and 4. And so those notes become in tune. It's very helpful, because it will also extend your low range because it's adding more tubing. So again, longer the instrument, lower the pitch. So let me demonstrate something here. I'm going to show you the difference between 1 and 3 and 4th valve here. You can hear a little difference in pitch. It's slight, but it's there. And the other thing I was talking about, being able to add low notes, the 4th valve will get you down into the tuba register. All right, so it'll add those notes below the staff. And there is euphonium music that calls for that, but it's not very often. So if you only have a 3-valve, you're still going to be able to play everything that's required for the music. Let's talk about tone production, because there's a lot of elements to making a good sound on the instrument. And with my students, I find that they say, well, I'm having problems with this or problems with that. It's almost always air related. Air is the key to making everything work well on the instrument. So if we can use our air correctly and efficiently, then a lot of these problems are going to go away. So breathing is the first thing. Your lungs are located basically in your rib cage. from underneath your shoulders down to the bottom of your rib cage. Now, if you're tense or you've got, your arm way up, you're draping your arm over your instrument, things like that, it's much harder to get a full breath. If your hands are in a natural position and down lower, and you take a nice full breath with your throat open, your rib cage will expand. You can feel it. It almost feels like there's a rubber band around your chest. And if you take a full breath every time, then your rib cage will help you push the air out. It's much less work to play. If you take a shallow breath, then you're breathing twice as often and you're having to work to push the air out all the time. So taking a nice full breath every time is a good way to do it. And you can do this, you don't have to take your mouth off the mouthpiece. You can get a full breath if your mouth is on the mouthpiece and you drop your bottom jaw for a moment, you can get a very quick breath, and I'll show you here. Right, so I keep the location, I'll do this again, maybe a different angle. I'll keep the location of my upper lip on the mouthpiece, but I can drop my bottom jaw just for a split second and fill up my lungs like that. And I'm right back to where I was, so I don't lose my location for the embouchure. Now, you can also feel when your air is leaving your body. Now, if you empty your lungs all the way, to refill your lungs is hard, and it takes a couple of seconds to do that, and sometimes even makes me cough. So when you feel your air getting down to, a quarter tank or two, it's half to 3/4 of your air has been used up, go ahead and take another breath. Air is free, it's easy to breathe in when your lungs haven't been completely exhausted. So, when I'm playing tuba and I have whole notes, sometimes I take a big full breath before each whole note. And that breath can be very quick. The music doesn't want you to have a big gap between notes, but you can take that quick breath and refill. If you wait until you're out of air, sometimes you don't survive the note, you can't get a full breath the next time, all of that stuff. Okay, so let's talk about the throat, because this is something that a lot of players aren't aware of while they're playing. But the throat can get in the way of the air. A lot of times when we're going for high notes, we kind of feel like we're lifting weights. We're gonna do that. We tighten up the throat. And also we've spent our whole lives, we use air for two things. One, to stay alive, and two, to talk. And we use the muscles in our throat to talk. So now our vocal cords are our lips, and we have to get the throat completely out of the way. And it's a hard habit to break. So you want to feel like you're fogging up a window, that warm air, right? That's where the air is making the least amount of noise. And that air is able to get to your mouth where your mouth can shape the air the way that it needs to. So always try and keep your throat relaxed. And again, I understand it's hard to be self-aware of that, and it's hard to change those habits. But an analogy that I'll use is when you're playing with a garden hose. If you've got your thumb over the end of the garden hose, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit as well, you can spray water really far. But if a friend of yours plays a trick and they kink the hose behind you, there is nothing you can do with your thumb to make that work because the water's not getting there. It's the same with the air. If the air can't get to your mouth can't do what it needs to do to make the sound. So that's a little bit about the throat. And then the tongue, believe it or not, is what changes the pitch on the instrument. And it's a little bit like whistling. So if you're able to whistle, do this with me. Whistle a low note to a high note and think about what your tongue does inside your mouth. Your tongue will be pulling back a little bit, and the back or middle part of it, everyone's a little different, but the back portion of your tongue is going to raise up. And so if this is the roof of your mouth and your tongue is doing that, you're creating a venturi here for the air. Faster the air, the higher the note. Now, another thing you'll see is that my face doesn't have to change much for those notes to change. A little bit of change here, but the shape of my mouth stays the same. So when we're playing notes on an instrument, you'll see I'm not smiling, I'm not contorting my face or straining to get those high notes. Inside my mouth, I'm using my tongue, and now I'm going to talk about what my embouchure is doing. Because of course, yes, there is some muscle control going on with the face. But let's talk about that, because a lot of people, to get high notes, they find that if they smile and pull their lips tight this way, or if they roll their lips inward like that, they can get high notes. And it's true you can, but you're not getting good tone quality with them. Your lips are your vocal cords, and you want the center part of your lips to stay relaxed all the time. And we're going to use the corners of our mouth to create a framework so that the center part can still vibrate, but we're going to control whether the corners are narrow or whether they're far apart. And I'm going to do a little bit of buzzing without the mouthpiece here so that you can see. Right? I kind of have a frown going on, almost like a marionette puppet. And the center part stayed relaxed. I didn't roll my lips in. If you roll your lips in, you get elephant squeals, right? And it's not a good tone. It's not a note. So that's the goal, is to always think about making round air. Low notes, you're going to make big round air. High notes, it may be a little smaller, but you're still thinking about putting round air and not blowing at the instrument, but blowing through the instrument. Try and picture that round air going through the instrument. And that's going to help with tone quality, it's going to help with range, and it helps with endurance. When I play with the orchestra, sometimes we play for 3 or 4 hours in one day, and that can be very tiring. If I don't use my air properly, I'm not going to survive it. If I start relying on my face is done in a very short amount of time. So, using those corners, using your air, letting the air get to the venturi, get through the lips. One other thing I'll talk about is teeth. Sometimes we start playing like this when we're playing the instrument, and you can hear the tone difference. I'm going to start with my teeth apart. And now I'm going to bring them in, and you can hear the tone difference. Right? It gets really noisy and breathy and pinched. So you want to have the cleanest, purest sound you can on the instrument. So keep your ears open, and those are kind of the key ingredients for tone production. Okay, so you'll see that there's a PDF available of some basic warm-ups that I wrote out. And on this sheet, there's both treble clef and bass clef. So the bass clef is about halfway down the sheet. But I like these as warm-ups, and I like them as tone studies as well. So you can use this not just to get your lips vibrating and your air moving, but also to work on tone production, getting the best sound you can. And the warm-up sheet just starts off with 2 notes connected with a fermata, 2 notes connected in a fermata. So take that deep breath we talked about, and in a really relaxed fashion, just exhale. You don't have to push or play loud. And let your air just naturally run out. And you're going to try and have smooth transitions and good tone quality. Lots of things you can work on. I'll do one more. Okay, so it's a good relaxed way of doing warm-ups. If you play a bunch of high notes when you first warm up, all you're doing is building tension and wearing yourself out. So the other part of the warm-up is lip slurs. And this kind of goes back to that using your tongue in the corners of your mouth rather than throat and smiling. So these lip slurs, you want the air to take you to the next note. Let it carry you to the next note. Don't interrupt the air to try and make it to the next note by pinching off the air. So here's an example of the first lip slur on that sheet. All right, everything's connected, everything's smooth. And your goal is to not fall off of notes. You know, sometimes it's easy to go, right? So you hear me falling off of each note. Slot each note so that all we hear is the note and none of its neighbors. Okay, so that's what's on the warm-up sheet, and these are two really good exercises and warm-ups to do. So let's talk about articulations. This is how we start the notes, and there's many different types of articulations. You can have everything from heavily accented marcato to tenuto to staccato. Tenuto is. So let's talk a little bit about that. When you start a note, technically your air is what starts the note, but your tongue places the note. Your tongue is the valve. And we can have an explosion of air. We can have the tongue stop the air and then, right? So now that air was built up behind it and we have an explosion of air, right? Or we can have very relaxed air and just a gentle release of the tongue. Generally, we use a T syllable to start the note. It's the cleanest and most common articulation. And where you do that in your mouth is a little different for every person, and it's a little different depending on what part of the range. If you're playing really low notes, then you may be tonguing off the bottom of your top teeth or even between your teeth a little bit. And if that happens, you have to keep it a clean T. You can't go th, it has to be ta. But most of the notes is going to be behind your top teeth. You just say the T syllable. Now, tenuto is a very soft tonguing, and sometimes the notes almost sound connected. I feel like my air is not really stopping. I'm just sort of interrupting the note. And that, that is a D syllable. Do, 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 do. And when you say do, like dog, it's off the roof of your mouth, just a little bit behind your front teeth. So there's different places that you can tongue depending on how sharp of an articulation and how connected or short you want it to be. So that's a little bit about articulations. Very quickly, and I'm not going to go too in depth on this, is intonation, how in tune the instrument is. And there is no such thing as a perfectly in tune instrument. You can pay $10,000 for a euphonium and it's still going to have notes that are out of tune. It's just physics. And so the most common intonation thing I already talked about. 1 and 3, 1, 2, and 3. It's very sharp. And if you don't have a fourth valve, you have to learn how to drop your jaw and lip this down so that you can bring that note into tune. Because if you just blow straight through the instrument, it's going to be so out of tune, it's not going to blend with the other instruments. So I'll show you just a little bit of lowering the pitch, and maybe you can see my jaw drop, I'm not sure. It's not much, but I'm dropping my jaws just a little bit and lowering my tongue as well to bring that pitch down. There are other intonation things that are more subtle on the instrument. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but the other one that's very common is concert D above the staff, or the E in treble clef. When you play it open, and that's the most common fingering, it's a good fingering, but when you play it open, on many instruments, it's a little bit flat, difficult to lip up. When you're playing quickly, no one's going to hear it. Don't worry about it. If you end up with a whole note you're sitting there on that note, the other alternate is to play a 1 and 2 fingering, which is how you play the low concert D or E treble clef. So you can hear the pitch go up just a little bit when I use that 1 and 2, because that note is a little flat otherwise. Those are the most common intonation things that you'll want to think about. There's others on the horn, but every horn is unique. And in a lot of method books, more advanced method books, they'll show you those alternate fingerings. And if you have a tuner or an app on your phone, something like that, you can actually see the notes on your instrument when you're playing at home, which ones are sharp, which ones are flat. But a lot of it can be affected by your tongue level and embouchure. So don't get too crazy about the alternate fingerings, because most of what I do when I'm playing with an orchestra is I'm adjusting the notes with the corners of my mouth and my tongue. So, but I wanted to point out that there are alternate fingerings if there's a serious intonation problem on the instrument. So I hope this has been helpful for you. I've really enjoyed doing this presentation, and stick with it, because if you're having troubles, persistence and a little information, you'll be able to do a great job with it.